The Tune Mig 45 is a Rode front hub from the Tune company of Germany. It retails at about $250, so it's pretty expensive. It's very lightweight, 50 grams, and let's have a look at the individual components, see how it works, and see what we can find wrong with it. Okay, so first of all, these are all the parts. This is my own hub. The reason it's taken apart is to show you how it all works, and also, well, we'll get onto it later, why it's apart. Okay, so first of all, you've got the center tube spacer thing. This is 7075 aluminium. In detail, it's got a shoulder machined onto it here, which forms part of the flange seating system and the bearing seating system. Okay, it's very thin aluminium all the way through. It's got the logo laser etched on. Some spacers here, which we'll get onto later about how that works. It's very similar to the way the Mag 170 works, so I think you can probably figure that out. Here we've got one of the flanges, the end flanges. This sits on the center tube. This is a 20-hole version. Now, this flange is quite interesting in that the main part of it is 7075 aluminium, but it's got this carbon veneer on it, which is about 1 millimeter thick, maybe even less. This is a bearing that goes in it. It's a 6802 bearing, which means it's got a 15mm bore. Okay. Here's the other flange, which has the bearing in it, pressed into it. You can see, actually, there's no rear shoulder in the bearing seat area. We'll show you how that works later. The holes are, I guess, countersunk for the spoke heads. It's a straight pull system. Now the axle is again pretty interesting, pretty special. This is a carbon axle with metal dropout parts pressed into it. If you look down the tube, I'm not sure if you can see that. Right, it's not really focusing, but if you look down the tube, the way that these things are pressed in, they seem to have a sort of lip machined onto them, which means that it's extremely tight fitting. You're never going to get that out. This is the end cap. This presses on to the carbon axle in the same way that the end cap presses onto the axle of the Mag 170. So this is pretty exotic. Carbon axle, carbon laminate on the flanges, very lightweight tubing. Let's look how it goes together then. So starting with the centerpiece, the center tube spacer, the flange just slides on like this and gets stopped by that shoulder there. The bearing is pressed into the flange. Now, if we look at this one with no bearing in it and slide it on, you can see, get my pencil, the edge of the center tube forms the bottom of the bearing seat, which is pretty elegant. I like how they've done that. Ignore that scratch there, please. So that's the bottom of the bearing seat. From there, the bearing gets pressed in and stops against the edge of the tube. That's the center. Then the axle goes all the way through the system when the bearing's in, obviously. Comes out the other side. I'm not going to press that all the way through because it won't come out. And then your spacers go on the end like this, and then the opposite side end cap gets pressed on. The whole system gets pressed together. Again, it's the same way that the Mag 170 works. So what's it like in use, and what's it like to work with, and what's it like to service? In use, when you're riding it, it seemed decent. I put in a lot of mileage on this, and I did some pretty nasty rides in wet weather, and putting sprints through it, putting a lot of force through it, and it seemed really good. It didn't creak, it didn't cause any knocking sounds when I was swinging the bike from left to right, climbing or sprinting or anything like that. So yeah, performance wise it was good while it was working. Building a wheel up from it, if we look at its direct competitor, which I believe is the extra light Cyber Front, or Ultra Front as it used to be called, the Tune Mig 45 is actually quite a bit narrower than the extra light. The extra light hub has a flange to center measurement of 43 millimeters. The Mig 45, the Tune Mig 45, is only 36 millimeters. So you're losing 7 mil on each side. So that's 14 mil total width less on the Mig 45, which is that's fairly significant. I also own the extra light Ultra Front, and it is noticeably more stable when you build it into a wheel. So in that sense, the Mig 45 really loses a lot of points here for the way that it's structured. Yeah. Now, other issues with this thing, due to the way it's designed, the bearing on each side is completely exposed. So let's have a look. When the end cap goes on, it just sits like that. So that bearing is completely open to the weather. Now it's got a seal on at the bearing, of course, but water can easily get around that. Those seals are not designed to keep everything out. Which means that if you ride in anything other than a completely sterile sort of Isaac Asimov giant spaceship garden in space, it's going to get loads of crap in it very quickly, and the bearings will suffer. Now you may think that's okay because these are just bearings and you can replace them, but replacing the bearings on this hub and doing anything with this hub, working with it in any way at all, is a massive pain in the arse compared to any other hub I've worked with, which I believe is a deal breaker. Now let's get on to why it's a pain in the arse. Okay, it's just due to the design. Now what they've done is, to keep the weight down, I think they've not thought about usability at all, or serviceability. They've just focused on, let's get it as light as we can, let's get it as exotic as we can, and sod the end user. Sorry, Tune, but I think that's what you've done. The first thing you'll notice is when you go to build this thing up, when you get the hub in the post, or when you buy or whatever, it comes with the flanges on like this, the axle through the two bearings, the spacers on the axle, but then one of these flanges is just slightly pressed on to the end like that, just so they can send it to you. Okay, you think, well, why have they done that? Well, to build this thing, to build this into a wheel, you've got to take that off, take the axle out of the whole center system, put the spokes through here, build the wheel up with the axle not in the hub shell, get the axle back through once you finish building it, put the washers on, press it down. And you might think, yeah, that's okay, whatever, you have to do that with the extra light. Yeah, you do. However, this is an extremely nasty friction fit. So I'm not going to push it on all the way here because I'll never get it off again. But that's me pushing as hard as I can. It's hardly even moving. So to get that all the way onto there, all the way through, is hard. To get the thing out of it is also extremely hard, right? And again, you might think, well, you only have to do it once. Well, no, because as soon as those bearings die, which is fairly regularly, because the way they're exposed, you're going to have to get the axle out again. Now, that is not the only problem as well, that it's, a tight fit. I mean, that's, whatever. The main problem, let me see how hard that is to get off. Right. The main problem is getting that, once you've pressed this thing on, this is an absolute bastard to get off. You need a specific Tune toolkit to do this, or you need to improvise extremely cleverly to be able to press this axle through this end cap to get it off without damaging this, right? That is so tight on there. So working with this hub is so hard, and I can't see why anyone would choose this over the extra light hub if you only even consider that. Now, again, that's not the only issue. There's another one. They give you these washers when you get the hub, but they give you no instructions about these washers. Sorry, you can see in there. They give you no instructions about how many to use, what sort of preload should be applied to the bearing system, etc. You have to just wing it. Now, again, that wouldn't be a problem so much if this thing was easy to get off, but it's not. So even pressing this on to the axle is so tough. Now, imagine you built your wheel up, you've got all the spokes through here, you've got the axle in, you're ready to go. The last step is to get the right amount of washers on and press this thing on finally. Now, the way that you test this is to put a washer on, press it all together, which is a fairly sort of, once you press it on, it's going to take you hours and hours to get it open again. Press it on, get it in your front wheel, and then hold the rim, wiggle the rim from left to right, and just see if there's any sort of knocking play, like any kind of like in the bearing system. If there is, you've got to press this thing out again, that is like a major job. Press that out again, put another washer in, press it back together again, pray it's going to work. Then you'll check it and it'll be move it again. Oh my God, get it off again. This is hours and hours of work with proprietary tools or inventing your own tools, and there's a big risk you're gonna scratch it. I mean, when I was the first time I even put it together, you have to find a way to hold something against this surface to be able to push against the inner part, which is this end cap. I scratched this thing. I scratched this hub here, my brand new $250 hub, just by trying to put it together. I mean, that's not good. So overall, I think this is a bit of a relic from the past, where they didn't think about usability and they were just thinking about how we can make a sort of sexy looking hub that we can, write some pretty good advertising sort of spiel that will get people to buy it. It is very light, yeah, but there are other hubs now which are as light, which are far, far, far easier to work with, i.e. the extra light. I wouldn't recommend this at all. If you've got one, whatever, ride it, but to buy it and work with it, it's so hard and just really not worth the hassle. So as you can tell, I'm not a fan of this. Sorry to anyone who is a fan, of course. Buy what you want, but there are alternatives which are far better. In fact, the extra light is actually lighter as well, so it's wider. It's got a wider stance and it's lighter. And the other thing, it's nearly $100 cheaper as well. Another thing which I think is a bit weird and silly. That carbon laminate, why? Why have they done that? That's seriously, it can't add any structural, it can't make it stiff or anything like that, because it's just a tiny, less than a millimetre thick sort of band of carbon. It doesn't make it lighter. I mean, this entire unit weighs about 6 grams. So even if it did take off a gram, you're saving 1 gram per part. So that's the difference between a 50 gram hub and a 52 gram hub. I don't know why they did it. Another thing, when you buy this, they haven't really made it very well, because you get all sorts of like resiny, gluey sort of crap, and you can even see some there. When I first got this was just smeared with overspill from where they'd wrapped it. And then if you look at the actual carbon itself, it's all over the place. I mean, I know it's probably very, very hard to work with carbon at this sort of micro level. It makes you wonder why they bothered. Right, so yeah, the Tune Mig 45. 10 out of 10 for boldness of trying to make something like this tune, but I reckon this is, a 10-year-old or however old idea that in 2016 I wouldn't bother. Right?